Good afternoon. I hope you all are having a great droidCon so far. I'm pretty excited. We have a bunch of great peers here. These are well-known speakers that you may know through having watched many Android talks, representing many large companies. Today we're going to be having a panel on what it means to scale in your application. I'll be moderating and representing Uber, and then we have a number of guests here. We'll do a round of introductions. We'll cover some high-level context on what it means to scale an app. We'll do some high-level overview of how our companies operate and how we think about certain topics. Then we'll be diving into specific tooling and how we think about those tools on Android in respect to these very large applications. And then finally, we'll be covering what it means to think about processes and engineering culture and those sort of organic people behavior in these large companies so that we can operate at such scale. So without further ado, I mentioned I'm Ty. I've been at Uber on our mobile platform team for 3.5 years. Before that, I was working on developer tooling at Twitter on Crashlytics and Fabric.
My name is Gabriel Peal. I was at Airbnb for 3 years, where I worked on a core mobile infrastructure team, supporting a team of about 75 Android engineers. I'm at a smaller company called Tonal now. It's a fitness startup, but most of this experience that I'll talk about today was about Airbnb.
Hi, my name is Lisa, and I currently work at Facebook on the Messenger Lite team, but most of what I'll talk about is extending our principles to the larger Messenger team, which is between 150 to 300 people, depending on how you count it.
Hi, my name is Pierre-Yves, Ricau, also called PY sometimes, that's what people call me. I've been at Square about 6 years, and I've seen it grow from like a small code base and a small team to a lot more people and code.
And hi, my name is César. I'm at Twitter. I have been at Twitter for the last 6 years. I'm in the foundation. I'm technical lead for the team. I work with the foundation team supporting 50 engineers and growing from a small application, a very small application that used to be 5 years ago to a fairly large application these days.
What sort of scale do y'all see regularly, and how do you structure your teams to support that? Lastly, what is your team's role in supporting that structure?
So in 2016, Airbnb went through a pretty big shift in the structure of the team. Before that, it was about 12 Android engineers and one mobile team that would lend out resources to feature teams. It then got essentially sharded into a bunch of vertical feature teams that each run fairly autonomously. And then there's a team of, right now there's really only 3 people supporting the actual infrastructure on the app side and another 2 or 3 supporting CI and build tools.
Square is pretty much went through the same story of like having initially one Android team and then a lot of feature teams, and we still have that, and we resisted for a long time creating a core team because we thought everybody was good enough to contribute to the core stuff. And eventually we created a core team, and I think we have about, I want to say 60 engineers in the features teams and maybe 10 to 15 on the core team, but also I've just made up these numbers, so I'm not sure.
Yeah. We have 7 or 8, I don't remember the numbers, feature teams, and then a foundation team. Originally, the application grew from being this very small application maintained by a core team that had to then support overnight a ton of engineers coming from a growth team. So we moved into a model where all of the engineers are reporting into a single engineering organization, but broken down into features for supporting each area of the application. And
Yeah, so as I was saying that we have part of our core team, the Messenger core team, is probably around 150 people, and those are all in the same organization. But then we have teams which do contribute code, but that team may work on both Android, iOS, and even web. They support their feature across, and so they also contribute code to us.
At Uber, we had a similar story. We started with one small team. Then after a big phase of hypergrowth, we're now at probably a couple hundred Android engineers and a couple hundred iOS engineers. I think we're at about 3,500 modules right now in our Android monorepo. With internal and external apps, I think we're supporting about 13 apps. We structure similarly where we now have a platform team. On top of that platform team, we actually have platform teams for each specific application. So like the Rider app has their own platform team, the Driver app has their own, and then we have a number of feature teams that sit vertically on top of that are shipping features out. Okay. How is developing for a large number of engineers different than developing for a small team? And what are some of the downsides to that?
Yeah, is it working? Yeah, it is. Is it different? Yes, because you're basically dealing with a large code base and a lot of people doing stuff, right? So you have to structure your code and your code base so that it's hard to make mistakes, because when you're a team of 5, if someone makes a mistake, you can see that and you can fix that, and also you can teach them. When you have 60, 100 more people that are contributing, it becomes really hard to train everybody, to just even know everybody, and to have this kind of relationships and help and build knowledge and make people better. I think it's one of the challenges.
Yeah, I would definitely really second that. When you're a small team and you really feel ownership over the app. You're part of the Android team, and whether the app is in a healthy state is really something that you care about, is in your control. But as the app grows, as it scales, as more people are contributing to it, you have to, in a certain sense, give up a little bit of that sense of ownership. It's no longer tangible to code review everything, to see everyone's code, to even know everything that's going into the app. Things will launch that you've never even heard of. You'll see code names that you don't know what they mean. And so you have to understand that as it grows, you have to really figure out what parts you can control, and then put in some guardrails to make sure that things can stay healthy as it scales.
Yeah, one of the principles that's been the most important on Messenger Lite that we're trying to bring to this rebuild in Messenger is the principle of modularity, because if you let people touch the same common code, then developing on it feels like walking in quicksand. You'll literally be watching this file, and every time you update your repo, it changes around you. It's terrifying. So you absolutely have to make sure that code is isolated in feature modules, and then after that, you have to practice detachment to say they can change it, and I have to trust them, whether or not I believe they deserve it. So you have to let them earn that trust, and then it's a two-way street there.
I think with that model of not really knowing not being able to know everything that's going into the application, there's also a lot of empowering others with that knowledge so that they can own their specific areas, and then just trusting that you have smart coworkers that are going to adhere to that.
And also empowering the future teams to help contribute back to the core code has been great too, because there's only so much a core team can do.
Something that you learn in a large team is that process matters a lot. When in a smaller team, you can just wing it. And for the most part, things work, and you can talk to whoever's on your side and explain what you're doing, and it will be okay. In a larger team, process and how you communicate and how you collaborate and how you do code reviews or not do code reviews, it makes a huge difference in how you can grow and how you can scale.
Yes, it does. So how did your mindset change after working in a really large app for the first time?
So before this, I worked at 2 startups where I was the only Android app developer, and then I joined Messenger Lite, which at the time had 13 engineers, and then I started working on the Messenger code base, and I thought, well, we just have to teach them all the things that we in this app understand. I couldn't have been more wrong. There is no way you can teach 300 people to agree with you. Even if you told them what you believe, you can't get them all to agree. And finally, you can't keep an eye on what they're doing.
And a big thing that changes is kind of your mindset around your affinity. So when you have one mobile team, the Android app is your affinity. And you can kind of see this reflected in just who people ate lunch with every day. So for a long time, we were a mobile app. The entire Android team would eat lunch together pretty much every day. And we were pretty sure that it would continue that way, even after we split up. And we found that as the team grew, fewer and fewer people were coming to Android lunches. And people were instead eating with their feature teams. And I think that it's sort of a proxy, or like it really just goes to show where affinities lie, and how if you grow the app and you start restructuring the team in a different way, you have to rethink about the way that people put themselves in relation to the Android app and the features that they work on.
before I ever worked at a really large company, I looked at a company like Facebook, not to pick on them, and said, what the hell do they do with 300 Android engineers?
I said the same thing.
And now after being at companies of that scale, I think to myself, wow, we don't have enough engineers. Everything feels under-resourced all the time.
To me, I always felt that tooling was a second thought. No one really cared that much about tooling. That's something that you get out of the box by Google or Gradle. With a large team, it turns out that productivity, working on productivity and getting obstacles out of the way for your developers is one of the most productive things that you can do as a lead. So it does introduce a number of concerns that just did not exist with smaller teams.
What does the day-to-day look like for your team?
We come in, we open pull requests, we write code, like all teams. No, I'm kidding. There's a little bit of. It really depends on the team, but generally, when you're in a foundation/platform team, you typically, compared to say product teams, you typically have less deadlines or they're less urgent. Like that refactoring, if it, at least from our perspective, if it doesn't have to land right now, it doesn't have to land tomorrow. In the long term, you do want to get a bunch of things done, but product is usually much more driven by deadlines. Whereas, and that's kind of it can kind of be scary at first because like you're starting this work and it's like you're trying to figure out what to do, and you could pretty much do anything. Everything's fine. But in a year from now, people are going to look back at the work and tell you, yep, what you did was right, or nope, it was wrong. Like shipping a product in that way, it's not that it's easier, but you don't have the stress of being wrong or like not knowing what you should be doing. You don't have like 20,000 options that you could go through. So I think that's the one thing about the day-to-day that's kind of different for me.
I think one thing for us is on a platform team, we work much more in an agency model than a lot of the product teams do. So a lot of our folks are very specialized in very specific libraries. They own those. There may be a couple contributors to that, and they represent that to the broader engineering org. And if you look at a normal product team, they have a cross-functional group. They're all working on one sprint together. They're contributing directly to that, and it's an entirely different working model than what you would expect in a large, startup-driven, tech company.
I can say I didn't expect what I would be doing at all when I joined this team. Now that we're acting as more of guidance or almost like a UI infra team, I come in every morning and I say I have 2 hours on my calendar where I do diff review. Because what I'm trying right now is to scale up the leads of other teams so that they can take over doing diff review. Because there's no way I can do diff review for 300 product engineers. So lots of diff review and then meetings. I do meetings where I give architecture guidance for feature teams that are coming to develop. I hope that changes.
Okay. How does your team choose what to prioritize and work on?
I will talk about foundation team. So that a foundation team, I think that one of the pitfalls of
What is a
foundation team? A foundation team is a team that's thank you. That's supporting all of the feature teams by writing the infrastructure for them, building frameworks, supporting tooling, and the such. It's usual to have foundation teams that sort of pass down their knowledge from their ivory tower for feature teams to implement, which doesn't really scale and ends up breaking down over time. So I think that one of the most important things for a foundation team to do, and all of us have foundation teams or core teams, we may call them different names, is to make sure that they're driving their priorities based on what matters most to feature teams and how they can be productive. So that's essentially what we do. We work very closely with them. We try to distribute the work, the foundational work, with feature teams, and we try to make it so that everything that we do ties back to some feature that someone is building. One
thing that we do is we kind of try to balance all the customer input, all of our different teams, their demands, what they're asking for, with some of the forcing functions that come in externally. There's new libraries coming out from Google or Apple. There's 64-bit constraints that are being put in place for shipping a new binary to the Play Store. There's new libraries that have to be upgraded to, and then API migrations done. So it's this balancing of all the input coming in from the teams, the forcing functions, and then the intuitive and grassroots-driven projects that are coming out of the team. We have these domain experts on the team that are pitching what the next big thing can be, and those folks need the opportunity to manifest their own destiny and drive forward on those projects and have time to build on those. And I think it's a healthy balance of those three that makes a platform team work well. Anyone else? Okay. How up to date does your internal tech stack stay with the mainline Android tech stack? Or how does it differ?
Yeah, so what you see a lot as apps grow is you build more stuff. Not just on the product side, but you build more features. Your foundation teams grow, and so one of the things that really changed this situation at Airbnb was the migration from Gradle to Buck, and on top of Buck was OKBuck, and that's really, we've moved away from this standard Android toolchain, and as a result, it's actually provided a lot of challenges in upgrading various things. Kotlin adoption came a little bit later. In particular, capped adoption came even later than that. We basically, in our first Kotlin rollout, couldn't use capped for the first year or more for various reasons related to Buck. And even today, there are a number of challenges where they're held back in terms of upgrading Kotlin to the latest version. They get almost every Kotlin release gets blocked through Buck or something for at least a little while until it gets upgraded there. Android Gradle plugin get really stuck. There was a while where we had to maintain support for, AGP 2.2 and 2.3 or 2.1 and 2.3 at the same time, and Gradle had to know whether it was running in Buck compatibility mode, and we had to fork a bunch of groovy stuff, which people hate to begin with, and then supporting two versions of AGP simultaneously for two different build systems can be a nightmare. And so when you're thinking about moving away from the mainline, you often bring in a lot of challenges like that.
So Square is I think Square is known for two things. One of them is making a lot of open source libraries. Another one is having a strong stance against fragments. I wrote that article a couple of years back, but that was kind of a shared understanding, I think. So our stance used to be, well, Android is open source, and we understand what's going on, and and the libraries that are out there, even the ones produced by Google at the time, are just not good enough. And we're not good. They were good for small apps. They were not good for larger apps, right? And I think that happened at a bunch of companies. Square was just more visible because we open sourced a lot of stuff. So we ended up writing our own stuff, and we ended up being wrong, so we would rewrite it again and then rewrite it again. We had a whole bunch of libraries. Today, Google is doing a way better job. I still hate fragments. I'm still not going to use it even if I switch company. That's more of a personal stance. But everything else is looking pretty great. The way we keep up to date, we kind of don't. It's well, if you want the new version of the library, if you're in the product team and you want the new version of the library because it has a nice feature or a bug fix, update it. It's fine. So we let people, and then there's should we bring this new library? And that's where we kind of do, we have conversations. We don't really have gatekeepers, and so we'll touch on that later. But yeah, we tend to pick what we need. And it can be good, it can be bad. An example of that is that we could not find a parcelable library for dealing with parcelable that we liked. But we also never quite made the effort of building one, or one that was good enough for us. And that led to, we just had manual parcelables for years. Until recently, Wray, I think, started using the Kotlin support for parcelable and putting that in. And it's amazing, and we should have done that a while ago. But because no one was really paying attention to that, we didn't. So it's kind of one of the...
For us, some things have come very quick and some things have come very slow. And I think at any of these big companies, when you're presented with a gap that you need to solve, and something doesn't exist and you need to build it, when that is later solved, there's a big investment in saying, well, we have something that works. Why should we now adopt the thing that Google's putting out? And so for each one of those new tools that's coming out with something like Jetpack or any support library, if something had been built before, there is that that thought that's put into that of, hey, is this better than what we had? Why should we move to this? How could we be interoperable with this? And I think that's on a per component stance. So in general, we are semi up to date, and then we've varied quite a bit. We were one of the earlier companies to move over to Buck, and we were the main contributor and own OK Buck, which has helped a lot of other companies move off of Gradle to Buck to be able to hit the scale that these sort of companies expect in their build system. But then for things like Kotlin, we've been slower to adopt because of some of the specific constraints that Gabe talked about, and we can get more into those a little bit later. But in general, a lot of this is back to that comment I made about feeling under-resourced. When all these teams, when you have a big company and you're pushing on, you're building your business, you don't want to be spending all your time doing migrations or re-adding another library or replacing something. You want to be focused on doing things that are good for the business, and you need to be able to prioritize that.
Yeah, I'd say in our team, we are trying to strike a balance, which isn't always easy, because a lot of development at Facebook, understandably so, is driven by the main Facebook app, which is absolutely enormous and has the largest number of Android developers on it. So we depend heavily on tools like Buck, and we do these distributed builds, and that is absolutely crucial, because I don't want to tell you how long it can take to do a build without one. But at the same time, that makes development a bit difficult compared to what I was used to. For example, when I started there, I was encouraged to use Nuclide for development. And then, I use IntelliJ. I was like, what about Android Studio? Well, now actually, I'm able to develop using Android Studio on top of Buck. So that's pretty exciting. But there's always a little bit of rough edges in this integration because Google isn't building it for us. They're building it for most other Android developers. So it's tricky to decide what to support and what it's worth supporting.
We deal with the same kind of problems. It is adopting any new technology requires a lot of work. Just a migration from RxJava 1 to RxJava 2 was a nightmare. Dagger 1 to Dagger 2, you're done, right? Yes. So you need to be very thoughtful about how you want what you want to take to take these technologies, but you sort of have to in many cases because it matters for hiring for one reason. People expect to see things that they can understand. At least they want to know why you're not using them. Why are you not using Kotlin? And also, it's useful because let's say Gradle. There is a lot of work that the Google team is putting into building splits, for example, or dynamic features and such that you would not be able to use otherwise unless you are on that stack. So you sort of have to, and we just make the effort.
Yes.
Yeah, and as a recommendation, like going forward from today, a lot of these problems arose out of the solutions not existing before, but now with things like Jetpack, with things like Gradle being better for multi-module things, I would try very hard to stay as close to the mainline development branch as possible. You're going to save yourself a lot of headaches.
So let's move on a little bit. At your company with so many engineers, how do you effectively communicate in-progress work? How do you, get feedback on stuff and show it to other teams?
We had to intentionally design this process because we've been reorganizing a lot. So we have kind of a pyramid approach. One, we do quarterly sort of conventions where we bring the whole team together in one place. We take the whole day. And that's both formal and informal presentations and networking. After that, we fall back to, we use Workplace, which is basically like Facebook for work. So there's groups for every team, and there's a group for the whole organization, and we try and surface important topics in there. And then from there, we break down into smaller sections, and we're trying to encourage people to post things that will create discussion, like new projects, design documents, new architectures. Post them first, and then people can self-select into discussion. So hopefully that way, the communication will trickle down to where it's needed. But yeah, it is something, it's complicated, and this is something we keep redesigning intentionally.
And communication matters a lot in a large team, and you need to design for it. You say it will not happen by itself. So we use Slack extensively, but then we have the mechanisms for remote work. The team is very highly distributed, and I would imagine that as companies grow, that's more and more the case, right? I don't think that growing in San Francisco is that as where we are is that as compelling anymore. So we are making an effort to make it very easy for people in remote locations to be a part of the larger team. So regular conventions, like you mentioned, is a thing, and then I don't know, just internal meetings, that sort of thing.
Okay. Anybody else on this? Otherwise, we'll be moving on to tooling now. Okay. How do you all structure your code? Do you use one repo or many? What's the complexities there?
That's a great question. It's actually, I think it's a fascinating debate that every company as you grow, you have the people who are like, no, everyone, like I hate working in the same repository as these other people who are doing their own thing. I want to be on my own. And then you have the people who are like, no, it's better. I worked at Google. I didn't, but like people say that. They're like, I worked at Google and we had the mono repo. It was amazing. Like some people will say that, or some people will say that they hated it. And so you get a lot of strong opinions, and it's hard to kind of figure out who's right. So we kind of, it depends. And the answer is it depends. We go for a mono repo when we have a bunch of engineers contributing to the same code. So in the example of Square, we have the seller organization, and that's probably like maybe, I don't know, 8 apps or Slack flavors, and they're all in the same repo. And that's, the 60 engineers. But then there's another app like Cash, the Cash app, which is like Venmo for those who don't know, but it's better. Sorry. And it's a separate repository, and they actually potentially use different tools. Because we don't want to slow each other, and we have different needs. But we found that like if you're trying to split things by repository, it becomes insane when you need to update. It's just a lot of work that you have to do. If you just have everything in one repo, just have one version of dependencies, it just makes a lot of work easier, and it means that you can do refactorings, like large refactorings. But it becomes a problem because you're also now dealing with a large amount of code in the IDE.
Yeah. So at Airbnb, we started with we've always had an Android monorepo, but then it used to be an Android monorepo and an iOS monorepo, and then something called React Native happened, and there we made a giant mobile monorepo. It was Android, iOS, and React Native, and it actually worked. It worked all right. Yeah. We had all 3 platforms in one repo. You can do some fancy stuff. You can do Git sparse checkout. You can do shallow checkouts as well to not pull in the entire tree and a bunch of other changes that you're probably not going to load. So you can actually get pretty fancy with Git. And at this point, it's between the 2 apps. Actually, React Native, by the way, totally gone from the Airbnb app. Not only is it sunsetted, but they actually shipped their first app without the React Native dependency at all a few weeks ago, which is a big deal. But one repo, and Git works just fine. And then there's a feature of Android Studio /IntelliJ that's really powerful, where you can unload modules from being indexed. And so we did something that actually ended up being very, very helpful. We called it Airbnb Lite, where we essentially created a little Gradle script that would allow you to create a new application module. And it had its own build.gradle file, just like any application module would. And with that, you would add any feature dependencies that you want. And that little application module would have a little launcher icon with its own empty activity that you could use as your own team's launcher into like specific points into your flow. And it would just be missing the rest of the app, which is great. Because then what you do in IntelliJ or Android Studio is you take that new application module, you unload all the modules, you click the app module that you want, click load, and then it'll give you an option to load all transitive dependencies of that module. And now you've basically checked out a really, really, really small version of your app with all the features that you need, and it's fully indexed, and you get all the capabilities because it has the full dependency tree as well. So that became invaluable. It actually reduced the average build time by 75%, switching to that. So that was really, really helpful for us. And actually, the little Groovy file was like 15 lines of code to do the whole thing. So
are you sharing anything with iOS these days? So you're just sharing the repo. Okay. You getting any benefit out of it these days then?
You're not getting that much harm out of it. There's some shared CI tooling, maybe some pipelines, because they go to a common thing. But then even those, like the builds, it'll look at the commits that are in that branch and determine whether to run the Android pipelines or the iOS pipelines. So, I mean, frankly, it's between Git sparse checkout and shallow checkouts. It seems to be holding up fine. So you can go really, really far with a Git monorepo.
At Uber, we started with one tiny monorepo when it was a small app. That grew. They created a bunch of different repos for different libraries and core. We ran into a ton of pain points at some point with nasty transitive dependencies and version conflicts. Moved back to an Android monorepo a few years ago when we did the rewrite of our writer app. Since put all of Android into that. iOS has their own monorepo. Some of our big shared cross-platform stuff like Maps is native. The restaurant app is all React native. Those things live in their own kind of mega repos. Then our open source libraries, GitHub is the single source of truth for those since we have dependency management that's proper. And then we have a long-term goal to bring the entire company into one big monorepo, and that's with backend and web and iOS, Android, ML, all of that into one. But that's a big undertaking and probably a couple years out.
We have we have one repo for Android, and we have both Twitter for Android and Periscope in that repo, which has been incredibly helpful in making sure that we are sharing infra, we are sharing practices, we are sharing modules. So we are now sharing the video player, for example, for both applications. So yeah, it feels like a monorepo in our case has been a very powerful tool for bringing people together and pooling the experience, which we would not have been able to do otherwise.
At Facebook, we also have a monorepo, and I like it. We have a true monorepo, like everything, web, iOS, Android, many other projects that I don't even know what they are. They're all in there. So one of the things that most impressed me when I worked at Google was the openness of the source code, that you can just start there and you can just read almost all of the code. You go anywhere and look at it and learn from it, and I was really impressed by that. And at Facebook, I'm having the same experience, except now I know a little bit more about what I'm doing, so I'm able to access it in a useful way. So I go in and use the code search, and I'm able to see, okay, I'm making this feature in Messenger Lite. What has someone done in Messenger? What has someone done in the main Facebook app? And we're easily able to share utilities or determine whether a utility that's there should be refactored and shared, or whether we should just not use theirs. But basically, it makes it a lot easier for knowledge sharing. And finally, one thing that surprised me about Facebook is how they encourage engineers to switch between projects, even if they don't have any previous experience. I thought that was crazy. But this super shared common code base makes that easy.
Yeah, I think your point about knowledge sharing is a really good one. And so as we've talked about these teams growing, and you can no longer review all the code. You don't even have time to do an in-person comprehensive onboarding for everybody necessarily. You might even have people coming in from other platforms just to do something really small who's maybe never really worked with Android before. So what you see a lot is this concept of copying and pasting similar shaped code. And we kind of laugh, but like we've all done it at some point, right? Like you go online, like basically every time you open Stack Overflow, that's what you're looking for. So it's basically a similar kind of thing, but inside of your code base. So as you're going around, you're like, who else has like launched a feature before with this certain transition or done an experiment of this type? And you search through your code base, you find it, you copy and paste it. So monorepos are good for that, but you have to understand that is going to happen. And so documentation is good, design docs are good, but having one place where you can point people to and say, this module has really high quality code that you can copy is also really, really valuable. So as we were moving from an undefined architecture to Mavericks, we set up an application module just for Mavericks with a bunch of code samples of how to do a bunch of different things. And anytime anyone had a question, we can be like, you can copy and paste anything from this module, and we've looked at it and we know that it'll be fine.
I just want to mention an example that I had. The copy pasting thing just reminded me of something that happened not too long ago, where we were tracking ANRs, application not responding on the Play Store, and we kind of had a high rate, like really high, getting close to really bad. And I was like, what's going on? Started looking, and so it turned out that we used tape for saving for saving data to disk. And so tape has like these background tasks that run, and they were actually running on one of them, or actually a few of them are running on the main thread. So what actually happened is someone had done like an Rx Java, using retrofit to call an Rx Java stream, which is fine. But then they were doing like, I think two blocking call or something like that on that main thread, which effectively blocks the thread, which, okay, why not? And then they put a comment right at the line above that was, this is okay because this tape call is happening on the background thread. But that's not what tape does. Tape actually runs, or the way we run it was on the main thread. So the comment was, it's fine, like they didn't understand it. Now the issue with that was, it happened once, and then a bunch more people had to make tasks, and they started copy-pasting that into a bunch of places. But luckily enough, I was able to search for that comment and find everywhere that it had been duplicated, and the ANRs went away.
All right, that's a great story. Moving on from repo, what kind of build system do you use? What does that look like?
I guess I can start real quick. We're still using Gradle. We switched to, we were inspired by our neighbors from 2 floors down, Uber, and we tried using a Buck for a while, and we're still using Buck, but we're kind of still using Gradle as well, and we're doing the partial Gradle thing you're mentioning, and we're also heavily investing into Bazel. So right now we're like kind of using 3 build systems. Most engineers, basically engineers with new machines use Gradle, engineers with old machines use Bazel, Buck because it's faster. And so we tell people, hey, get a new machine and stop using Buck. But we're hoping to switch to Bazel in a couple, I want to say month. Yeah.
We started with Gradle, like everybody else, and we ran into incredible performance problems a few years ago. About that time, we made heavy investments into a tool called OKBuck, which was a Gradle plugin that allowed you to take a Gradle config and then output a Buck config. And we used that to facilitate a migration to a Buck build system where we scaled to 3,500-ish modules. We've recently changed OKBuck to run from anytime any Gradle files change across the monorepo to being very explicit and owning all the dependencies in a single module, significantly faster to run, and then we copy those into the third-party locations that Buck would expect, and now folks are manually configuring their Buck files. Like a lot of companies, we're also starting to invest into Bazel. I believe we're going to be moving there in Android sometime next year. Our other big technology stacks are moving there prior. But with the goal to get into one monorepo, one aligned build system is going to be needed as well.
We are using Buck. I don't see that changing anytime soon, actually. We are structuring our apps to take advantage of its strength by making, one of the things we try and do is micro-modularity, where we try and avoid terrible transitive dependency loops by making sure that our modules are so specific. And I think we have something like 1,200 micro modules in Messenger Lite today, not even the main Messenger app. And this obviously would never be possible without Buck. And by the way, we have a clean build is something like 30 seconds for that app. So Buck really, really helps us. And
can I add one thing, and then I'll let you chat? You might not all have the historical context of all those build tools is kind of interesting. So they all originate from Google, who had Blaze, an internal build tool, right? And then people left Google and went to Facebook, and they were like, I miss my tool, so they made Buck. They went to Twitter, and they were like, I miss my tool, and they made Pence. And I think, is there any other one? And so Bazel is when Google eventually open sourced Blaze. And so we're kind of like, that's why one of the reasons, Facebook invested heavily into Buck, so it's good for them. But one of the reasons that a lot of companies are looking back at Bazel is like, well, we kind of don't really want to invest into our own tool, our own build tool. And so Square on the server actually switched to Pence and basically did a kind of and a bunch of people liked that, a bunch of people hated that. But we were actually looking at also switching away from Pence on the server side and going with Bazel. Android is leading, but server will probably go to Bazel as well.
And from a philosophical perspective, you have Gradle, which works really, it does a lot of incremental builds. If you make a change, it'll add things on top. But for a while, it was not great with modularization. It's much, much better now. but a lot of Basil and Buck were kind of built in with a different philosophy that you should have a ton of independent compilation units. So instead of doing incremental compilation, it does a ton of things in parallel to try to overcome that. So no full compilation of any one compilation unit takes more than a few seconds, ideally. And you can parallelize it on servers and CI and across all your cores really easily.
We don't have a huge team that's dedicated to supporting the build, and I find that investing in any one of these tools requires the maintenance. It requires a dedicated tool that can support it. So we've been using Gradle. We're using Gradle with Gradle Enterprise, caching, and we are tweaking for performance very carefully, which you can do in a small team, and it's been working quite well for us.
Yeah. And yeah, the tweaking of Gradle and everything that's totally fine, because none of these other solutions are silver bullets. I guarantee it. In fact, the usage of Buck at Airbnb has been an absolutely enormous headache. It's required an incredible amount of work, ton of parallel build systems. So this thing called OKBuck, which Ty mentioned, basically generates Buck build files from Gradle build files. So we're maintaining Gradle anyway. We use it for release builds and to take advantage of new things that Google is doing, like data binding or dynamic delivery or a number of different things that Google is doing in the Play Store and building into Gradle. So if you decide to move away from Gradle, you really, really want to think long and hard about whether you actually have to or whether you can actually invest a little bit of work into Gradle. See if you can get your CIs to have an HTTP build cache and actually put some attention to make sure that your build cache is stable. Because with things like Gradle build scans, you can pretty easily look into things that are invalidating your Gradle builds, and there's a lot of work that can be done there. Sometimes super low-hanging fruit even. With just a couple lines of code, you can have huge differences in terms of the invalidation of your cache.
So would you say, based on your experience with other systems, would you say that there is something fundamental about Gradle that doesn't scale? Do you think that whatever it is could be fixed? The Gradle guys are in the front. I want the answer from here. I know you're going to say no.
For us, the configuration times are still extremely problematic at the scale that we're at with 3,500 modules. But I think that's a different topic, perhaps. Yeah.
Not many people have that many.
One thing I'll mention that not that the other tools solve it well, but one of the main issues that I have with most build tools is that they work like magic. So it's like, oh, trust us, put this one line and then it works. And when you have a problem, it becomes really hard to dig in. I think one of the interesting switches is, say you make a Gradle plugin. It is so much nicer to do it in Kotlin than to do it in Groovy, because Groovy, you're like, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm just copy-pasting this, and I don't know where it's going. If it's Kotlin, you're like, I'm just clicking, and, well, eventually you may hit some weird, Groovy stuff, but that's because, wait, what? Anyway, that's how Gradle is made. But anyway, my ideal tool is a tool where I need to configure it. I can see the source, I can debug it, which you can do with Gradle, but it's so hard, and you have to learn. By the way, you can easily attach sources, you can easily debug your Gradle builds, but usually you don't know how to do that, and you have to think about doing it.
One more quick thing to add on to what you said about not deviating from the standard build systems unless you absolutely have to. Definitely Facebook and Uber have the best integration with Buck that anyone has, I would say. And we have an amazing team that works full-time supporting it for us. And we are still missing features that your average Android developer who's just downloaded Android Studio has because Google builds for Gradle. So, for example, we have an integration we put together to use data binding. We're loving it right now, but we have to keep maintaining it. Every couple of months, we think, do we still want to keep doing this? And yeah, it's a lot of work, and you give up things when you roll your own, even at the largest companies. So
speaking of POI's comment on Kotlin, it's probably best that we move on to the next tool that we're going to talk about. Kotlin's an exciting topic, as we can tell from looking at the schedule here, where I think every other talk is Kotlin here. How do your companies think about Kotlin adoption?
I can start, I guess. Square was known, for being an early adopter. Jake put out a doc and convinced people to move to Kotlin. So in our big repository, we basically said everybody can. There's one module that was too big where we said don't do Kotlin because it's going to slow things down. But we we broke it into many modules since. So it's very much we didn't want to convert the entire repo because we don't want to lose the Git history. That's the main reason. But the idea is whenever you touch a file, totally okay to convert it to Kotlin. Kotlin is amazing. We just get, at first, even like I'm kind of a skeptic in general. So when I started doing Kotlin, I was like, well, it's fine, but like really does it change anything? And then I converted code that I wrote, and it would give me warnings, and I just did the auto conversion thing, and it was telling me like, oh, you're doing something wrong with like handling null pointer exceptions. I was no way, and I looked back at the Java code, and I had written those bugs. I thought I wrote perfect code, but turns out I don't. So yeah, and we're there, we're using it.
Yeah, similarly at Airbnb, we actually did our first production Kotlin feature in 2015, 0.7, something like that. But we really quickly started to realize that the lack of an incremental build was a problem. So we rolled that back and we waited a little while longer. And then we switched to Buck, and then that blocked us from using Kotlin for a while longer after that. But it was the beginning of 2017, I think I got the year right, yeah, where we're like, all right, let's start doing this for real. So we went through the book. We created a little group called the Kotlin Reading Group. And we worked through the book Kotlin in Action right when it came out. And we assigned each person a chapter or a few chapters. And once a week, we would present that chapter to the whole group. And it would give that person an opportunity to learn it. And then also, you learn things best when you're able to teach them to somebody else. So then we had a group of people who were essentially like language certified in Kotlin inside of Airbnb. And then we created a GitHub group called Kotlin Reviewers. And anyone who felt like they were new with Kotlin and wanted any help or someone to review the language usage that they had could tag the Kotlin Reviewers GitHub group to get people who knew Kotlin. So that was really effective. And that lasted for the first few months of the rollout. And at this point, it's pretty much just 100% of new stuff. And probably 80 to 90% of the effective code that you'd interact with would be Kotlin.
So when I was interviewing in this last round, I interviewed at a large number of large companies. For example, ones like Amazon, Facebook, and Google. And I was advised by recruiters at all companies like these that I should interview in Java because they weren't writing enough Kotlin to be able to find enough interviewers to give me, a good interview experience. So I studied Java. I couldn't remember how to initialize an array in order to do these interviews. This was 1 year ago. I'd say, honestly, the situation hasn't changed very much. We're still writing mostly Java, and for good reason, because like I was saying about build systems, when you write your own, nobody updates them for you. So Google has been doing the work to support Kotlin. Now we have to do the work to support Kotlin. I'm happy to say that there is a task force internally, and we have committed to doing it, but it's going to take us some time. So what we're seeing is that we're seeing pockets of Kotlin popping up, mostly with new apps. For example, the core UI of Portal is written in Kotlin, which is cool. There's Kotlin in our new cryptocurrency app. So I think you're going to see it coming sort of obliquely from little pockets. And we also have a Kotlin reviewers group like that, although at this point, we have enough Kotlin experts who are writing Java. So we have enough expertise and enough enthusiasm. And we're basically just trying to catch up as far as our systems and tooling.
We're also in the similar catch-up because we're using Buck. We wrote our first set of Kotlin, I think, back in 2015 or early 2016, but we haven't been doing feature development in Kotlin until pretty recently, and even that is not officially supported. We do have quite a bit of Kotlin today in the mono repo. I think last I looked, we were at 10 to 20%, but a lot of that is generated code, or tooling, or annotation processors, or internal apps. And then we have some like offshoots, like our autonomous car stuff is fully in Kotlin. But we're running into similar issues where Java is a long supported language with a rich ecosystem, both for performance and for safety. So in Buck, if we're doing mixed source sets with Java and Kotlin, which you're likely going to see if you're using any annotation processor, then you can get up to 4x the build times. And on these huge monorepos, that's really, really problematic for folks to be productive. Not only that, but we make heavy use of things like error-prone, which is a Java-C compiler plugin that does these checkers like lint, but at compile time. That's something that Google puts out, and we've made heavy use of that to do all kinds of creative safety checks. And we just don't get things like that in Kotlin for now because the compiler API in Kotlin isn't stable. And even if it was, we haven't had the ecosystem invest into anything like that. So for all of those steps, we're having to make those contributions to get us into that place. So we're committed to it. We have teams that are picking it up. We have experts internally, but it's slower moving than if you were at a small app outside of Uber or Facebook or some of these similar companies.
We are in a similar situation. We are adopting it slowly. It is very mature these days. It wasn't for the longest time. The tooling was not really up to snuff. The Android Studio was slow. It was super slow with a large code base like ours. So it is not a pleasant experience. Using the language in theory on paper was, but not in practice. It is much better now, and we are actively investing in it. Still, one thing that we are very thoughtful about is how does it affect our culture and our conventions? Do we have the right conventions, the mature conventions? Because for the most part, with Java, there is one way to do most things. That's sensible, right? With Kotlin, that may or may not be the case, but I don't know that we have the experience to tell. So it affects how you work, it affects how you collaborate, and that is something that you need to be very careful with when you are adopting a new piece of technology.
Yep. So let's go through one more question on tooling, and then we'll move into how our eng culture and processes work at these big companies. How does your company approach experimentation and feature flags? How do you get this sort of safe development and roll out at scale?
Oh, you're gonna love this. We don't experiment. We don't do feature flags. We do a little bit. Like we do it for the onboarding flow, and that's about it. Mostly, Square has a very interesting. Well, the culture anyway has been one of let's design the right thing. We don't need to spend years like rolling out an experiment and then splitting hair and looking at numbers. It probably comes from like the products we build. They don't have the same. Can I say it? So I've read on Twitter. I read the theory, which I don't know if it's true or not, but it's funny, that the main reason Twitter uses so many feature flags is because they don't know why it's working, so they're worried they're going to break it. And I don't know if it's true or not, and probably no one knows. Maybe they know at Twitter, but I just found it funny. And Square is very much the other way. Maybe Facebook's the same. I don't. Maybe not. Okay, I'm trolling everybody, and I have the mic, so it's great. But no. Anyway, my point is we mostly, and so we'll get to that. I guess you will have a better context on what feature flags are amazing for being able to test things. If you work with data scientists, most of the time people do feature flags and they come up with a random number and like it's better. And you're like, well, but what is the variance and what is like the math behind? Did you just say it's better by 2 over 10,000 or whatever? Like, it's hard to get the math right, and it makes your code becomes a mess. So we generally avoid them unless we really have to.
So at Airbnb, I think we know why it works, and we also use experiments. There's actually 2 reasons to use experimentations and feature flags. One is so that you can actually measure statistical differences, and you need to actually do some statistics to understand what kind of value you're getting out of a feature flag. Depending on the margin of difference that you're expecting, you might need a huge number of users or a very long time window to actually get statistical difference. So you need to be careful and actually do some statistics to understand that. But the other one has to do with releasing features. So I've seen almost more often than actually doing an experiment for the numbers, and certainly at smaller companies and startups frequently, is that at Tonal we're using feature flags for gating features. We release the app every week. Airbnb was the same. Every week we released, and having this decoupled release train from any sort of feature or feature teams means that unless you have long-running feature branches, which I don't recommend, it means you're launching these incomplete features into the codebase, and you need a way to gate them. So we've been using them extensively for that. It also gives you a way to let your beta testers test things. You can do staged rollouts. You can potentially turn off a broken feature without rolling out a new version of the app, which is very powerful. So you need to think of it both ways.
Okay, we do that as well. I kind of lied. we do. Well, we have the release train, so we do use feature flags mostly as like a lot of times as compile flags, and then we also use them for progressive rollout of features. But I guess what I was trying to say is we don't use the A/B testing a lot.
On the platform team, we don't do a lot of experimentation for the sake of trying to find the statistical difference, but we do make heavy use of feature flags. For some of these, mostly for safety reasons. For a product like Uber, there are folks that are using it for their livelihood or to commute, or to go to the hospital. Like, there's all kinds of critical use cases. And if the app is just crashing for someone and they can't use it, that can be a very detrimental situation to that user. So we make heavy use in our architecture and in our experimentation to try to give that reliability. And so we make heavy use of feature flags for that, where we can slowly roll something out to 5 or 10 or 50%, especially as we have this worldwide audience with a huge fragmented set of devices. We can observe the crash rates or the issue rates that would occur, and then make a decision to continue that rollout or roll it back and fix it or whatever needs to be done. And there have been a number of occasions where we went to roll something out thinking it would be totally safe, and then I was paged at 3 a.m. in the morning, looked at it, said, oh, that's my code that I was rolling out, flagged it off and went back to bed. And without that sort of system in place, you would maybe be woken up to a high crash rate and have to hot fix it and wake up other people and get a release out in the wild, and then you have a slow update cycle, and that's just not a good place to be.
I don't think I'm revealing anything by saying that the Facebook app is famously full of A/B experiments. Like, if the 20 of you in the front row all turned up your Facebook app, they'd probably all look a bit different. And so when I showed up for boot camp there, I was surprised to find that we had this whole suite of really sophisticated tools, making those genuinely useful and help. I don't know anything about statistics. Hopefully I know 1% about statistics now. But yeah, so that was really genuinely driving decisions and preventing unintended consequences in an app that's used by 2 billion people every month. On Messenger Lite, on the other hand, we were trying to keep things so simple. We didn't even used to have any A/B testing framework in it at all. So it was literally impossible. We do now, but we mostly use it in this kill switch kind of way, where we can use it to do stage rollouts of features. And then we can tell, is the feature good or is it not? But we don't build 5 versions of the feature and tell which one's better. Yeah. On the other hand, not getting that kind of feedback early can hurt you. For example, the first UI feature that I wrote, I was like, this UI looks so much better. People are going to love this. Went out, it regressed performance and it regressed people sending. And I was shocked and frankly kind of upset. So this kind of testing could have prevented that.
We do a lot of experimentation. It is true. Whether it is because we don't know why the application is working or not, that's an urban legend.
So can you confirm that you know why Twitter works?
That's not my job. But we do use them. We use them for very different reasons. For example, we tweak the size of our thread pools based on experimentation, and we may also determine what is the right size in emerging markets versus in the United States. And there are many aspects of how the application works, on how it's perceived, that's very cultural, that we may not understand. So it's when you break down these experiments by cultures, you may learn things that you hadn't considered. And there are cases of experiments that failed for reasons that we were not expecting, like the full bleed images for tweets, for example, that looked amazing, but it made our tweets larger, which made the impression count lower, which tanked revenue. So never happened. We remember that we switched the colors of a follow button from blue to gray. That tanked revenue as well, because people were not following anymore because they thought the button was disabled. Many times it's just not something that you could that you could expect, and it depends on the culture. So yeah, there are good reasons. We try to limit it as much as possible. But
okay, thank you. I would suggest that we move on into the process and culture now. So how does your company manage releasing applications?
Go for it.
Right. It depends on the app. Most of them have a 1 week release cycle. Messenger Lite has 2 weeks, but we have now figured out that we're in the minority and for a good reason. So we're trying to move to 1 week also. But in addition, like everyone was saying, we can use kill switches to release our features with a stage rollout at any time. And I think that's pretty typical.
At Airbnb, CI cuts a branch on Tuesday morning automatically. There's a cron job that does it. It goes, the QA team always works off of that branch. We have a CI job that auto-uploads from master to the alpha channel on the Play Store every 6 hours, and then from the release branch to the beta channel every day. And then after a week of QA, we just ship whatever was on that. For if you need to do any cherry picks onto the release branch, it requires an additional reviewer before you can land.
Yeah, so that's, I think, and we'll see about that, but I feel like most of us go through the same. We all adopted the Facebook model of the release train model, so you have like one main branch and there is a branch cut every week or every 2 weeks, and that gets tested on a separate branch and then that gets shipped. So you're shipping a new version so if you're on a bi-weekly, if you cut a branch every 2 weeks, you're effectively shipping, and say it takes 2 weeks of testing, you're shipping the code from a month ago. So it's kind of like that's the kind of delay you get. But so we have the same thing, and we do a lot of manual QA. So Square is kind of interesting and different in that we're dealing with payments. A crash when you're dealing with a payment is lost money, and it's not insignificant. And people they're really money is something that people really get frustrated about. So handling that right was important. So we have a lot of manual. We have internal QA people. We pay external firms to perform QA on our app. We have a huge suite of UI tests, of instrumentation tests, and they run on every pull request. So that makes pull requests longer to build, but we have like thousands of those tests. Plus, so Square now ships hardware. I don't know if you know that, but we have like an Android OS point of sale, which it's really nice. It kind of looks like Apple design, but I'm not supposed to say that. It's really beautiful, but it's our own OS. So we also have dedicated hardware testing for this. So we used to have this little swiping machine, like swiping robot, that would swipe a credit card all day to test the hardware. And now we have this full-on, it's weird. You see the Android device completely opened up, and you see cards connected, and there's like a thing connected that's emulating a real card. And so we have our UI test, and we have this full OS kind of layer. I've never seen that elsewhere. It's pretty impressive.
We also do the build train. Most of our apps have a 1 week build train. The driver app has a 2 week build train. That gets cut every Monday at 6 p.m. If we're, what that enables is product teams don't have to worry about a specific timeline to get that to market as long as they hit the build train.
Is it true?
Is what true? Well, people chase the train. We tell people not to chase the train, but they do.
Right.
It might be Monday at 4 p.m. and they're scraping by for last minute reviews to try to get something by. Generally, we educate against that. It's not a healthy engineering culture practice, but it still happens. Right. As platform members, we often chase behind the train. So if we have a large change that we can't necessarily feature flag, like a large migration or something like that, we'll wait until immediately following the 6 o'clock cut and then land it, such that it can have maximum incubation time inside of our nightly builds, to make sure that sort of thing would get the sort of eyes on it that we would expect. Then we have a large external QA team. We also make very, very heavy use of automated tests inside of the company. Those get run on all the builds, both on diff as it goes out, as well as on our submit queue as that gets landed to master, and then on the nightly builds that are getting run as well.
So we follow a similar process. We cut on Friday morning, so that people should know that if they break the build, they will have to work over the weekend, and that does wonders. And also, we make it very hard. We make it really painful to merge any fixes into the release. Painful, you need to escalate it. It's painful enough that people will have an incentive not to even try to merge anything risky before the cut, and it kind of works.
We also have an intentionally painful hotfix process that requires manager approval and escalation, and But I was going to say, Facebook actually put out a very interesting white paper on build trains. If that's something that's interesting to you, that's public, and I would recommend reading that.
Oh, I was about to say I was on call last week, and the on-call has to approve the hot fixes. So I wish they were more painful. They were only painful to me. No, in addition to not chasing the build train, the worst is when you're chasing the performance review cycle. That's all.
Speaking of performance review cycle, what aspects of your engineering culture do you find interesting?
Should I start? Okay. Yeah. So the engineering culture at Square is. I mean, I've been there 6 years, right? So people ask me like, "Oh, do you like Square?" I'm like, "I've been there 6 years. Like, I like it. It's great." There's a ton of aspects that I like, but it's somewhat different than what I've seen at other companies. So a bunch of things. There's transparency. You can find that in a bunch of Silicon Valley company already, where you can have access to a ton of information. There's one thing that's kind of weird about Square is that we're very decentralized, especially on the technical side. So, for example, we don't have a CTO or a VP of engineering. There's no reporting that goes up there, which means that for making technical decisions, there's not really a person responsible. So we worked a lot by consensus. And by consensus, I don't mean that we just do nothing because we can't agree. It's more about learning how to influence people and how to convince people without having the authority to do so. So we teach people that. We teach them how to do, okay, we're going to write a design doc. That's one of an interesting one, right? And you write a design doc, you get a few reviewers, you try to get the people who are going to care about that, and then you extend the circle, and then you extend the circle. By the time you share the design doc with the wider circle, everybody's already bought in, so it's like, and you've already figured out everything that you needed to work. So it's definitely one of the Eng culture sites that I really love. And if I could continue on that, there's obviously the open source. A lot of people ask me like, oh, so do you have like engineers dedicated to open source? Do you spend like, how does that work? Like, who's in charge? No one's in charge. It's just a culture. So I joined Square because of the open source, and I do open source, and I also do work. And open source is kind of like work, and it's understood that part of my time is dedicated to that, but it doesn't really go into any sprints. It's not really tracked. And a bunch of people do that, but it's not, we don't have an open source manager. We like sharing the code we write.
Yeah, I really want to second that last point. So I built Lottie, Android, and Mavericks from out of Airbnb. Lottie started as a hackathon project, a successful hackathon project, but it was a hackathon project, and I basically, right before launch, just kind of made the decision that I wanted to spend time at work doing that. It's kind of just a personal prioritization kind of thing where you have to weigh that against the priorities of your team and how it's going to affect performance reviews and whatever, so be it. And then after that, it's basically just been evenings, weekends. People come up to me and they're like, oh, like, well, is the Lottie team considering this? I'm like, I guess I'm the Lottie team. That's kind of how it works. Mavericks was kind of similar. We started building it as just a solution on top of Android Jetpack to solve a few additional things that it hadn't quite covered yet. And then when I knew that I was leaving Airbnb, I knew that I really wanted to use it after I left. And so I basically open sourced it for myself. And so that's the story behind that. But now other people are using it too, and that's the beauty of open source. But at the same time, like you have to actually put you have to invest time and resources into it yourself. And if you don't care, then the organization's not necessarily going to pick up the slack for you.
The one thing that I found the most interesting about Facebook as a whole is sort of the lack of ownership over code. And ownership can be a good thing, but often it's not because it leads to gatekeeping. I was completely surprised my first week, pick up a task. I've never met anyone on any of the real app development team. I'm still sitting in the training room with all my other trainees. Most of whom are straight out of college, so they can't help me. Well, maybe they can help me, actually. Maybe they can help me a lot. And I contact the person, I find the code in our repo. I contact the person who, git blame. Well, I was HG blame. And the person's like, well, I don't know. I just reformatted something in that file. Talk to this other guy. Talk to him. I don't know. I mean, yeah, I wrote the class, but I haven't touched it in 2 years. I'm like, who owns this? No one owns it. So finally, I just, make my change and I find some other people that were recommended to me by word of mouth and they review it and they're like, thank you so much for taking ownership of this code. And I was like, oh shit. So yeah, there's not any really top down from the team what you should be doing. It all comes bottom up. And so we've had to achieve change through attempting to get cultural consensus, but ultimately people will do their own thing. And the larger the team has gotten, I've understood how grateful you can be for anyone helping with your code. So you have to have sort of that soft power to try and have people help you.
I want to tack on to what PY and Gabe said around the open source. One of the reasons I joined Uber was I was very excited about open source, and there was a lot of internal priorities that were starting to happen around that. And I've been really excited to see those grow from very informal, just passion around that, to a very well-structured process internally, where the company deeply cares about our open source presence. We actively have OKRs around open source. We have a working group and a committee that oversees strategy for open source, and we're a member of the Linux Foundation. And that's been something that as much effort as I've wanted to put there, the company has empowered me to do that. And that's not on nights and weekends. That's been at the company during the day, and that's been something that I found very valuable personally.
That's nice, I guess. I want to add a couple of things to that. So one of them is, so if you use an open source library, it's not just for Square, but basically, if you have complaints, so the first thing is think about the fact that there are people involved, and it's not a big corporation, devil kind of thing. It's actual real people, and it's probably one person or two. So they're real people. So when you file an issue, think about the people. Be nice. Use the contributors on GitHub to see who's actually doing most of the changes. Those are the people you want to talk to. For example, Lee Canary is today mostly me. Workflow is Wray and Zach. I think Picasso is mostly John Rodriguez, J-Rod. I could be missing some people. And then, so each of these libraries have different people attached to them, and that's kind of informal, but look at that and recent commit if you're interested. The other thing I wanted to mention, because we chatted about that before, is how do you influence culture? And so one of the interesting so Square a couple of years back, we did not do design docs. It's a Google practice. So we're like, well, we have many more engineers, and everybody's doing random things in their corner because Square is very decentralized. How do we establish a culture of design docs? There is one really, really high leverage thing you can do, is you put that into the promotion process. And that is super effective. So we said, well, design docs are important. And when we review promotion packets, we're going to ask, where are the design docs? Obviously, you can be worried about that because you're like, well, then everybody's going to make shit design docs every day. Like, is that going to happen? It didn't happen for us. I mean, there are a few bad design docs, but when we do promo review, we say, well, that's a bad design doc, and we need to teach you how to do a better design doc. But it was kind of a joke when it started. I was like, really? We're putting that into the promo process? And it changed the entire culture, and now it's ingrained, and people don't even think, wait, why do we do design doc? It's a thing. Yeah.
So, Lisa, you brought up a point around code ownership earlier, and I think that's a really good segue into talking about how your companies think about code review and code ownership in general.
Raise your hand if you've been through a reorg.
Reorg?
Yeah. Yeah.
Pretty
much everybody. Exactly. So that basically says everything you need to know about code ownership. As you go around the code base, you can get blame, and you can go back and you can find someone, but there's a good chance that they don't even work at the company anymore. They've reorged to a different team. Like, once they've reorged to a different team, like, they might as well wish they don't own any of that old code before. So beyond answering a few questions for them, it's basically, from their perspective, almost just like a charity of their time to this old thing that they know that's no longer a priority for them, right? And so we just have to be pragmatic about that fact. What that does mean, though, is that if you're working in a large code base, just kind of be okay with that fact. Don't stress out about it. There's really no way around it. If we had a solution to all of this, then there wouldn't even be reorgs in the first place. Reorgs are not inherently bad. As companies grow, they inherently change shape. And so I think that reorging is often a way to accommodate for that. So it's really not even a bad thing. So as you're going through, just don't stress out too much. Be willing to go and change someone else's code and put up the PR. And if they care enough, they'll review it. And if not, then it was kind of unknown anyway. And so no one was going to do it if you didn't go ahead and do it.
If I can add one thing to that, that's kind of interesting. So we've had every now and then there's people who suggest, oh, this was merged and it was a bad change. We should enforce 2 reviewers on every pull request, right? And when I hear that, I go, hell no. Like, no way ever. It's a personal opinion of mine, of course. But the rationale for me is when you're doing that, it's already too late. It means that you're already in a world where you don't trust your coworkers. Generally, the idea is, well, we want to set up a culture where when you put up a PR, your job, you're not trying to merge it as fast as possible. You're trying to find the right reviewers. And if you find someone and they are like, I don't think I'm the right person, they're going to find someone else for you. And once you have that culture in place, the hardest part is just starting with the right culture. But when you have the culture of we want to do quality changes, we don't want to be gatekeepers, which I love what you said about that. And then it becomes okay. And if something bad is merged, guess what? The person is going to be, feel terrible enough that they're going to be more careful next time. You don't have to enforce some shit on top or whatever. Anyway, that's my perspective. I care about this.
I think for a long time when we had a very large platform team before we kind of federated a lot of that power at Uber out to other app platform teams and other core teams in the different apps, the platform team did act as a gatekeeper in a lot of ways. And we very intentionally moved more to the model of being stewards of the monorepo and the quality as opposed to gatekeepers of that. And as, I like that word steward because that implies that most of the time you're trying to help folks do a better job. But occasionally you do still have to be a gatekeeper, right? So we use Fabricator for code reviews, and that allows us to have automated rules, and we can place positions of ownership and pull in blocking reviewers and set automatic rules that get triggered to bring in reviewers and things like that. And so we do that for specific things. When new third-party libraries get added, for example, it brings in the platform team to take a look at those and make sure that we're pulling in something that would be expected. If something is known to be very critically bad as a pattern or risky, sometimes we'll add those herald reviews to pull in someone so that they can just double check that, hey, this RX thing that in the past caused ANRs, we just want to make sure this is being used correctly. We'll use those. So for the most part, we don't really try to focus on being the gatekeeper. We try to focus on being helpful and the stewards. But then to the concept of ownership, that's where it becomes really murky. And I think it's a very similar problem to what Facebook has. There's some very clear areas where we have active maintainers of libraries. And if there's contributions there, we have a domain expert who's the go-to person. But then we have a giant bulk of reusable code that's used everywhere in the Android monorepo. It's under a common folder that has a variety of ownership. It could be someone that was reorged. It could be someone that's still actively contributing to it. It could be someone that left the company, and everything in between. And so that is where the expectation is that folks should be willing to step in there and contribute outside of their comfort zone. And then I think that's a big problem with education and getting them comfortable doing that.
I think that's something to bear in mind with code reviews is that it's one of the most powerful tools that you have for shaping culture. How people collaborate, how people, what the code that gets into the repo looks like. Do people work in very large patches that they merge all at once and they send over the fence for rubber stamp? Or do they work on small incremental patches where they share their thought process with their reviewers so that reviewers are coming along for the ride with you instead of just watching from a distance? It matters and it makes a huge difference, and this is something that you can potentially even enforce through the tooling. So I think it's important that you give it very careful thought to what tools are you providing to your developers for code reviews, how are you using them, and then as a lead, you can lead by example, and you can show how using those tools in a good way is like, and you can even block people from using them in any way that you find is not productive.
Yeah. And then to subdivide that even further, when doing a code review, there's effectively 2 different things that you're looking for. There are things that can be determined with static analysis, and there are things that you need your intuition and domain understanding in order to get to the root of. And what I've seen happen before in code bases with limited static analysis checks is that someone hops in to do their code review. They find a style or a nit or something small that could easily be detected by a machine. They leave a few comments, and then they submit their review, right? And from their perspective, they did their job. They read all the code. They found some stuff, which means that it worked. They did their job, and then they step away. But unfortunately, what they were basically doing is replacing the computer, not using their domain experience in order to provide a good code review. And so what I recommend is setting up as many static analysis tools as you can to fundamentally change the mindset of why people are doing those code reviews. So what we've done at both Airbnb and at Tonal is we have KT-lint and detect. KT-lint actually runs through detect formatting, as well as Android lint with almost everything turned on. If you're in the Java world, there's error prone and find bugs and a number of other tools. I recommend using as many of them as possible because at that point, if your reviewers are confident that the machines will catch all of the nits, then they know that that's not their opportunity to feel good about their code review anymore. And all they can do is do their actual job.
I feel lucky that there is a great culture of that and a great team that has worked to turn on all of these static. I was actually shocked to see some of these systems in action. This was my first opportunity to see it when I joined Facebook. When I joined the Messenger Lite team in December, we were less than 20 people, and we had a culture of in-depth code review by multiple people for almost everything. You would just get auto-tagged on Fabricator, and this was how we did 90% of our communication. We didn't really write design docs, we just started writing code, and almost all communication would happen on these diffs. When we started working with the larger Messenger team after a reorg, we had to radically change. These tools that used to auto-tag me on, say, half the diffs, I was now tagged in about 200 diffs a week. It was impossible for me to be effective in any way or have context on these as a code reviewer. And so we had to go towards personally asking people for reviews before we wrote the code, saying, hey, will you be involved with this project? Getting sign-in, writing design docs, soliciting interest before, so that you can drill down and find the people involved. And a lot of communication moved out of the code. So that was fascinating to me.
One thing I want to mention about PRs is the same that I said about open source. There's people on the other end. Be nice. I'm saying that, and I've been not nice sometimes, and I regret it. I once put a link to effective Java on Amazon, like just, horrible. Don't do that. Don't. I would not. You should not work with past me. I'm not doing that anymore. But so be nice is definitely one of the important things. And the other thing is when it's not just about being nice. Like when you leave comments, think about like one of the most frustrating thing is when you leave a comment that's like, oh, you should do this instead, but it's kind of open-ended and you don't tell them exactly what you have in mind and how they should do this, right? And that's horrible, especially with like more junior engineer where they're like, I have no idea. And they could spend like a week on something where you just had the thought that maybe this was better, but you're like not sure, and you thought, you know what, I think there's this new thing, you maybe should use that. Like if you're going to do that kind of comment, you should spend the time thinking, this is how I would do it, and let me tell you exactly what I'm thinking about. Like be precise, I guess.
I'll add one final comment here, and then we can go to the last one. It's a lot about expectation setting. A lot of folks feel differently about a blocking review versus just a comment on a review. Some people view that as like a very harsh signal, like, hey, you blocked it, this is critical, oh my god, I need to change this, or why did you block me on this, this one specific nitpick? So getting that shared understanding of what they expect. If they're adding comments and they're not blocking, do you need to resolve those? Are they expecting that you are? Are they investigative? And getting that understanding in your entire Inch culture is going to help folks move forward without feeling or taking offense at specific things.
And so one thing to that point that we've started doing at Airbnb and Tonal is for any comment that's sort of like optional and like really, really minor, we'll add nit : at the front. And yeah, it removes that aggressiveness that you can be felt with the comment. The other thing we've done is when there's just a few small changes, it's this concept of trust. So if it's a few small changes that we trust that they'll get right, we'll leave a few comments and approve it at the same time. We'd like, it looks good, fix these few things, and you can land it as soon as you fix it. It's not blocked.
All right, let's move on to the last question. What's your top tip for teams that are planning to scale?
modularize by feature today.
One top tip.
Wait, you want more? Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, are we good? You can hear me? Okay. Yeah, modularize by feature today. Seriously, like all of the build tools, including Gradle, are getting so much better at it. It's like there's almost no downside to doing it. You're going to do it sooner or later anyway, and once you have a tangled core module that has a bunch of old features and legacy code, you can never roll that back, and that will always sit at the base of your dependency tree and will block everything else from compiling. So as soon as you can keep the bottom of your dependency tree as small as possible, you'll be golden for a long time.
Okay, my advice for how to, I guess, anticipate scaling, don't. Like, the likeliness that the app you're working on will need to scale is fairly low. It's not you personally, it's just like, some of us lucked out and ended up in a big company, or the company ended up growing, but you'll have that problem when you get there. There's so much more work you could be doing than trying to anticipate scaling. And by the time you get there, the problems are going to be much different. So in general, I do like the idea of modularizing in general, but just my general advice is like, ignore the problem until you can't ignore it.
Something I think that works well with both your advices is designing your culture of collaboration very early on. How do you want people to work together? How do you want to collaborate? What's a healthy code review process? How do you communicate? How do you use design documents or not? Think through it very early on, because that will shape the culture in the future. Your team may or may not scale. If it doesn't scale, well, it's great anyway. But if it does, this is what your team is going to look like in the future.
I would say set up your app for CI and get a test suite running in CI now, because it's the single best thing that you can do to save your own time as a single developer. You never have to run the tests, and you don't have the time to test it. And it's the best thing that you can do as a large team, in my opinion, to prevent problems, to be defensive.
And I would suggest that you stay on the mainline tools as long as possible. When you're going to move to some of these tools that we've talked about today, be very specific about the need that you're solving. Do it very cautiously. Do all your research first. Be very hesitant to move on to things like Buck or Bazel or distributed builds or a lot of this stuff, because most apps don't need to scale. A lot of people over-engineer that very early. And like PY said, you don't want to take on that burden now when you should be building the business features of your startup or your small company and moving that into a place where you're actually lucky enough to have the problems at scale.
And use fragments.
And with that, we're done here today. We're all going to be around over there near the tables to take questions afterwards. And thank you all for your time today.